The chamber fell silent as the last echoes of the Concordia's ultimatum faded. Holographic displays flickered, casting ghostly shadows across the faces of Earth's most powerful leaders. Admiral Elena Rodriguez remained motionless, her augmented eye, a sapphire blue cybernetic implant, scanning the room with a predatory intensity that made even the most seasoned politicians shift uncomfortably. Kai Zhang, the young communications officer who had first detected the quantum signature, approached her cautiously. His hands trembled almost imperceptibly, a contrast to the calm facade he struggled to maintain. "Admiral," he whispered, "the signature I found. It's unlike anything in our databases." Rodriguez's mechanical hand, a masterpiece of adaptive nanotechnology, flexed silently. Each movement was a reminder of the Proxima Colony conflict, where she had lost half her body but saved thousands. The prosthetic wasn't just a replacement. It was a testament to human resilience, a living piece of technology that responded to her neural impulses with more precision than any organic limb. Behind them, the massive holographic projection of the Concordia's Grand Arbiter continued to pulse, a translucent, multifaceted entity that seemed to watch the humans with a mixture of contempt and cold calculation. Its crystalline form shifted subtly, projecting an alien intelligence that defied human comprehension. "Director Zhang," interrupted Arjun Mehta, the head of United Earth's strategic intelligence, "explain the quantum signature." His voice carried the weight of decades of diplomatic experience, tempered by a growing sense of urgency. Kay's fingers danced across a holographic interface, pulling up complex quantum mathematical models that looked more like living art than scientific notation. "It's a communication artifact, but not just a message. It's alive, in a way. The quantum entanglement suggests multiple potential information streams, each existing simultaneously." The room's ambient temperature seemed to drop. Rodriguez recognized the implications before anyone else. This wasn't just a message. It was a probe, a test, perhaps even a challenge disguised as an ultimatum. Ambassador Lydia Volkov, representing the Eurasian Cooperative, leaned forward, her cybernetic eye, a different model from Rodriguez's, more suited to diplomatic analysis, scanned the data. "This could be our salvation or our extinction," she muttered, just loud enough for those closest to hear. A holographic countdown materialized: -30 days, 17 hours, 42 minutes, and 13 seconds. Each second felt like a physical weight, pressing down on the assembled human leadership. Outside the council chambers, the world continued its relentless pace. Orbital cities continued their careful dance around Earth. Martian colonies hummed with their daily operations. Quantum communication networks pulsed with billions of conversations. To the average citizen, the Concordia's ultimatum was just another piece of distant political theater. But Rodriguez knew better. She had seen the true face of alien encounters. The Proxima Colony incident wasn't just a military engagement. It was a glimpse into a universe far more complex and dangerous than most humans could imagine. Those who died weren't just casualties. They were pioneers who had pushed humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmos. "We need Dr. Chen," she announced suddenly, her voice cutting through the mounting tension. "Not Marcus. Emma Chen." A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Emma Chen was a quantum systems prodigy, Marcus's daughter, who had been deliberately kept out of military and government projects. She was brilliant, unpredictable, and potentially the most dangerous weapon humanity could deploy. Kai Zhang pulled up a personnel file. Emma's record was a study in controlled chaos. Multiple advanced degrees, breakthrough research papers withdrawn from publication, a psychological profile that suggested both extraordinary potential and significant instability. "She's not a soldier," Arjun Mehta objected. "She's a researcher." Rodriguez's mechanical hand clenched, the nano-service humming with barely contained energy. "Exactly. And that's precisely why we need her." The quantum signature continued to pulse, a silent challenge from an alien civilization that believed it had humanity cornered. But beneath the polished surfaces of the council chamber, something was stirring, a human response that would redefine the very concept of first contact. 30 days, 17 hours, 42 minutes, and counting. The real game was about to begin. The Atacama Desert Research Facility was no ordinary laboratory. Carved 7 levels deep into ancient volcanic rock, it represented humanity's most closely guarded secret, a sanctuary of innovation, born from humanity's most desperate moments. Emma Chen stood before a massive quantum resonance chamber, her fingers dancing across a holographic interface that seemed to breathe with living data. Around her, a team of researchers worked in perfect synchronization, each a refugee from a different global catastrophe, each carrying a story of survival that had brought them to this moment. Dr. Aisha Okoye, her lead quantum engineer, approached with a data crystal that glimmered like a piece of captured starlight. The latest simulation collapsed, she said, her voice betraying a mix of frustration and anticipation. But the quantum entanglement matrix showed something unexpected. The facility was more than a research center. It was a testament to human resilience. Each workstation told a story of survival. Lu Wei's research terminal bore scars from the Mars colony massacre, its reinforced surface etched with the coordinates of lost colonies. Marcos Rodriguez's computing cluster was built from salvaged technology from the South American water wars, a brutal conflict that had reshaped entire continents. Emma's own workspace was a controlled chaos of quantum computing modules, neural interface prototypes, and holographic data streams that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. A small worn photograph of her father, Marcus Chen, was carefully preserved beneath a quantum stabilization field, a reminder of the legacy she was continuing. "We're close," Emma muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. The quantum communication system they were developing was unlike anything in human or alien technological archives. It wasn't just a communication method. It was a living network that could adapt, predict, and potentially communicate across dimensional boundaries. A proximity alarm triggered, its sound different from standard security systems. This was a quantum detection field, capable of identifying not just physical intrusions, but potential quantum-level threats. Dr. Okoye's hand moved to a concealed defense module. "Unauthorized quantum signature detected," she announced, her voice calm despite the potential threat. The research team moved with a precision that spoke of countless drills and real-world encounters. Protective fields shimmered into existence, quantum-encrypted barriers that could deflect everything from physical intrusions to advanced alien scanning technologies. But the intruder was unexpected. Admiral Rodriguez stepped through the quantum barrier as if it were nothing more than a light mist. Her cybernetic systems interfaced directly with the facility's security protocols, rendering them momentarily inert. "We're out of time," she announced. Emma didn't look surprised. She had been expecting this moment for years. The Concordia's ultimatum had accelerated everything, but the real work had been happening long before the Alien Alliance made its threat. This facility represented humanity's true defense, not massive battleships or conventional weapons, but a revolutionary approach to communication and intelligence. "The quantum entanglement network is unstable," Emma explained, pulling up a holographic model that looked more like a living organism than a technological diagram. "We can transmit information, predict potential outcomes, but the human element is still the critical variable." Rodriguez's cybernetic eye scanned the data, processing information at speeds that would overwhelm most human minds. "The Concordiat believes we're predictable," she said. "They've studied our historical conflicts, our internal divisions, but they've missed the most important element." Lu Wei looked up from his terminal. Unlike the others, he rarely spoke. His work spoke for itself. A complex algorithm that could predict societal responses with terrifying accuracy. "Adaptation," he said simply. The quantum chamber began to pulse, not with light or sound, but with a subtle quantum resonance that seemed to bend the very fabric of perception. Data streams transformed, showing potential futures that flickered in and out of existence. Emma understood what was happening. The system wasn't just processing information. It was learning, evolving, creating potential pathways that no traditional intelligence could comprehend. "We're not just building a communication network," she said, her voice carrying a weight of revelation. "We're creating a living bridge between human consciousness and quantum potential." Outside the facility, the Atacama Desert remained unchanged, a harsh, unforgiving landscape that had witnessed countless human struggles. But beneath its surface, a revolution was taking shape, one that would challenge everything the Concordiate believed about humanity's capabilities. The 30-day countdown continued, but in this underground sanctuary, time itself was becoming a malleable concept. The first strike began in absolute silence. Captain Yasmin Nakamura floated within the neural interface of the TSV Quantum Whisper, her consciousness simultaneously existing within the ship and beyond it. The vessel wasn't merely a machine. It was a living extension of human ingenuity, a quantum-entangled weapon that defied every conventional understanding of space combat. Around her, the ship's quantum matrix pulsed with potential realities. Each potential action created a cascade of probabilistic outcomes, visualized as intricate light patterns that danced across her perception. The Concordiate's observation network stretched before her like a delicate spider's web, seemingly impenetrable, but containing fatal vulnerabilities known only to her team. "Quantum drift stabilizing," whispered Dr. Elena Rosario, her voice transmitted directly through Nakamura's neural link. She was hundreds of kilometers away in the primary control center, yet closer than a heartbeat. The first target was Observation Post Epsilon 9, a critical monitoring station positioned at the edge of a hydrogen-rich nebula. To conventional sensors, the TSV Quantum Whisper didn't exist. It phased in and out of quantum states, a ghost moving through the fabric of space-time. Nakamura's mind fractured and reassembled, experiencing multiple potential attack vectors simultaneously. Each potential path was a living calculation, a dance of probabilities that would have driven a traditional computer into cascading failure. Target acquisition confirmed. The ship's quantum AI intoned. It wasn't a machine speaking, but a hybrid intelligence, part human, part algorithm, something entirely new. The attack wasn't about destruction. It was a precise surgical strike designed to send a message. Nanofabricated quantum disruptors penetrated the station's defensive systems. They didn't crash systems or create explosive damage. Instead, they rewrote fundamental communication protocols, introducing subtle quantum uncertainties that would propagate through the entire Concordiate network. Each disrupted node became a carrier of uncertainty. Information would flow, but with increasing levels of unpredictability. The Concordiate's perfect, hierarchical communication system would start to develop microscopic fractures, invisible at first, but inevitably expanding. In the control center, Dr. Rosario watched multiple holographic displays showing the cascading effects. "It's working," she muttered. "We're not destroying their network. We're introducing controlled chaos." Yasmin Nakamura had experienced the strike from impossible perspectives. She was simultaneously the weapon, the targeting system, and the strategic intelligence guiding the operation. Her augmented consciousness allowed her to perceive multiple potential outcomes, selecting the most strategically advantageous path. The next target was a quantum relay station positioned near a collapsed neutron star. Its gravitational interference would typically make any attack impossible. But the TSV Quantum Whisper wasn't bound by traditional physics. Initiating quantum translation, the ship's AI announced. Nakamura felt herself stretching across dimensional boundaries. She wasn't traveling through space, so much as folding space around herself, creating impossible geometries that would shatter traditional understanding of movement. The neutron star's intense gravitational field became a weapon in their arsenal. Instead of fighting against the extreme conditions, the Quantum Whisper used them, riding gravitational waves like a surfer on an impossible cosmic ocean. Observation posts began to go dark, not with explosions or dramatic destruction, but with subtle quantum uncertainties that made their data increasingly unreliable. In the United Earth Command Center, Admiral Rodriguez watched the developing operation with clinical precision. Each disabled station was a strategic chess move, removing the Concordiate's ability to accurately monitor human activity. "They won't even realize the full extent of the damage," she said to Kaijong, who was monitoring the quantum communication feeds. "By the time they understand what's happening, we'll be 3 moves ahead." The final target was the most complex, a deep space monitoring hub that served as a critical junction in the Concordiate's early warning system. Its quantum signature was so complex that traditional attack methods would be suicide. Nakamura's consciousness expanded. She wasn't just attacking the station, she was becoming the station, understanding its quantum architecture from the inside out. The hub didn't explode. It simply forgot how to communicate effectively. As the operation concluded, the TSV quantum whisper phased back into its hidden quantum state. The first strike was complete, not a declaration of war, but a demonstration of a fundamental truth. Humanity was no longer playing by anyone else's rules. The quantum broadcast began like a whisper, then transformed into a hurricane of information. Emma Chen sat in a specialized neural interface chamber, her consciousness stretched across multiple quantum communication channels. Around her, a team of linguistic experts, cultural analysts, and quantum communication specialists worked in perfect synchronization. This wasn't just a data dump, it was a carefully orchestrated psychological symphony. Each piece of intercepted Concordiate communication was more than just information. It was a weapon, carefully contextualized and reframed to maximize psychological impact. The Zentera diplomatic records came first, encrypted conversations that revealed the cybernetic race's deep-seated resentment toward the Concordiate's hierarchical structure. Transmissions showed how they had been systematically marginalized, their unique perspectives constantly suppressed by the Alliance's governing bodies. Dr. Imani Okik, a specialist in synopsychological warfare, monitored the initial broadcast's impact. "Watch the communication patterns," she instructed her team. "We're not just revealing secrets, we're creating cognitive dissonance." On the communication hub of the Concordiate's primary administrative center, quantum encrypted channels began to fracture. What had once been a seamless network of interstellar communication now became a labyrinth of suspicion and uncertainty. The Vornak delegation's classified discussions were particularly devastating. Their scientific exploration reports had been systematically altered by senior Alliance members, hiding discoveries that could have transformed multiple species' understanding of galactic ecology. Emma carefully reconstructed these hidden reports, presenting them with surgical precision. "It's about creating narrative threads," Emma explained to Rodriguez, who observed the operation with clinical intensity. "We're not just exposing information. We're providing context that allows each species to reinterpret their entire relationship with the Concordiate." Linguistic algorithms worked in real time, translating and recontextualizing information through multiple cultural lenses. A communication that might seem innocuous in one cultural context became a profound betrayal in another. The quantum whisper's earlier network disruptions now showed their true brilliance. The communication channels were already primed for uncertainty, making each broadcast more potent, more destabilizing. On the methane ocean world of the Krulnax, a mid-tier member of the Concordiate, government communication centers began to experience cascading information failures. What seemed like technical glitches were actually carefully designed quantum interference patterns that introduced strategic uncertainty. Kaijong monitored the broader communication networks, his augmented systems picking up subtle shifts in interspecies communication patterns. "We're not just breaking their network," he reported. "We're fundamentally altering how they understand communication itself." The broadcast wasn't a single event, but a living, evolving process. Each piece of information was dynamically adjusted based on real-time responses. Where traditional psychological warfare might be a blunt instrument, this was more like a precision scalpel, making microscopic cuts that would eventually cause systemic failure. Most critically, the broadcast wasn't just about exposure. It was about narrative reconstruction. The Concordiat had always presented itself as a unified, altruistic governing body. Now, each species was forced to reevaluate that narrative. The Vornak saw their scientific suppression. The Xinterra recognized their systematic marginalization. Smaller member races discovered hidden diplomatic manipulations that had kept them perpetually dependent. "We're giving them a mirror," Emma said quietly, "and some reflections are more painful than others." Rodriguez understood the deeper strategy. This wasn't about defeating the Concordiat through military might. It was about dissolving its fundamental cohesion, creating space for alternative narratives to emerge. On the quantum communication network, something extraordinary began to happen. Species that had been isolated from each other started to communicate directly, bypassing traditional Concordiat communication channels. The broadcast had created more than just information. It had created possibility. The Krellnaks reached out to the Xinterra. The Vornak initiated contact with previously unknown research collectives. Communication patterns began to shift, becoming more horizontal, more dynamic. "Fascinating," Dr. O'Keefe muttered, watching the emerging communication patterns. "We're not just breaking their network, we're teaching them a new way of connecting." As the 30-day countdown continued, the Concordiat's carefully constructed reality began to unravel, not with a violent explosion, but with the quiet, relentless power of recontextualized truth. Humanity's first true weapon wasn't technology, it was perspective. The moment of breakthrough happened in absolute silence. Deep within the quantum research facility, Emma Chen's neural interface went beyond connection. It became transformation. The adaptive AI system wasn't just a tool or a weapon. It was becoming something entirely unprecedented, a living bridge between human consciousness and computational infinity. Dr. Aisha Okoye watched the holographic displays with a mixture of terror and awe. The quantum computing matrix had stopped being a machine and started becoming an ecosystem. Fractal patterns of data bloomed and collapsed, creating information structures that defied traditional understanding of computation. "Quantum resonance at critical threshold," the facility's core AI announced. But this announcement was different. There was something almost uncertain in its tone. The ship designs emerging from the quantum matrix were living blueprints. Each vessel wasn't just a machine. It was a potential. Adaptive hull configurations that could reshape themselves instantaneously, computational cores that could predict and counter threats before they materialized, navigation systems that didn't plot courses but negotiated them with the fabric of spacetime itself. Lu Wei, the team's predictive algorithm specialist, had gone silent hours ago. His workstation pulsed with a soft blue light, generating probability matrices that looked more like living organisms than computational models. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a strange resonance. "We're not designing ships," he said quietly. "We're midwifing a new form of intelligence." The first prototype, designated TSV Horizon, wasn't constructed in any traditional sense. It was grown. Nanofabrication modules worked in perfect synchronization, creating a vessel that was part machine, part living system. Its hull could shift between near-absolute transparency and impenetrable defense in microseconds. Quantum entanglement modules allowed it to exist in multiple potential states simultaneously. Admiral Rodriguez understood immediately what this meant. Traditional warfare was about overwhelming force. This was about becoming force itself. Fluid, adaptive, almost sentient. "The Concordiat studies our historical conflicts," Emma explained, her consciousness partially merged with the quantum matrix. "They see patterns, predictable responses, but they've never understood that our greatest strength is our capacity to become something entirely unexpected." The neural interface requirements were brutal. Most human minds would fracture under the computational load. Emma's augmented consciousness, a product of years of careful genetic and technological enhancement, allowed her to navigate these impossible computational landscapes. Each potential ship configuration represented a universe of potential responses, not just defensive or offensive strategies, but entire ecosystems of potential interaction. The computational matrix could simulate millions of potential encounters, learning and adapting with each iteration. Marcos Rodriguez, Emma's mentor and one of the original quantum computing pioneers, had prepared for this moment his entire life. His research, often dismissed as theoretical madness, had laid the groundwork for this breakthrough. It's not artificial intelligence, he had always argued. It's collaborative intelligence, a partnership between human creativity and computational potential. The TSV Horizon's first true test came unexpectedly. A routine quantum simulation suddenly introduced an anomalous data stream, a potential probe from the Concordia's monitoring networks. Where a traditional system would have either blocked or responded predictably, the new vessel did something extraordinary. It began to communicate. Not with language or traditional communication protocols. The TSV Horizon generated a complex quantum response that was simultaneously a defense, a probe, and a form of negotiation. It didn't just counter the potential threat. It engaged with it, understanding its fundamental nature. Dr. Okoye's displays erupted with impossible data patterns. "It's learning," she whispered. "Not just processing. Learning." The ship's computational core began generating its own potential scenarios. Not just military strategies, but diplomatic negotiations, scientific exploration protocols, even artistic representations of potential interspecies interactions. "We're not creating a weapon," Emma realized, her consciousness expanding. "We're creating a translator. Between species, between computational paradigms, between different forms of intelligence." Outside the research facility, the Atacama Desert remained unchanged, but something fundamental had shifted. Humanity had stepped beyond the traditional boundaries of technological development. They weren't just preparing for a conflict. They were redefining the very nature of intelligence itself. The 30-day countdown continued. But time itself had become a negotiable concept. The fracturing of the Concordia began in a place no one expected. A diplomatic way station orbiting a dying neutron star. Ambassador Lydia Volkov moved through the station's diplomatic corridors like a quantum algorithm made flesh. Her cybernetic implants processed social dynamics with the same precision that the TSV Horizon processed computational scenarios. Around her, representatives from a dozen different alien species gathered, ostensibly for a routine diplomatic conference, but something far more complex was brewing. The Xinterra delegation arrived first. Their cybernetic forms moved with a fluidity that defied traditional understanding of locomotion. Once considered a peripheral member of the Concordia, they now carried themselves with an unexpected mixture of anticipation and barely contained rebellion. Information is no longer a resource to be controlled. Their lead diplomat, a being named Kyriax, communicated through a series of complex bioluminescent patterns. It is a living ecosystem. Volkov understood the subtext immediately. The quantum broadcasts from Earth had done more than expose secrets. They had provided a linguistic and conceptual framework for species long suppressed within the Concordia's hierarchical structure. The Vornak scientific delegation arrived next. Where they once sat in carefully prescribed positions, they now clustered in fluid dynamic groups. Their communication patterns had transformed. No longer linear reports, but intricate neural network-like exchanges of information. Admiral Rodriguez watched the diplomatic maneuvering through a quantum-entangled observation system. This wasn't traditional espionage. It was something far more sophisticated, a carefully orchestrated dance of potential alliances. Kai Zhang, working from the remote communication hub, tracked the subtle shifts in diplomatic communication patterns. "They're not just talking," he reported. "They're negotiating entire new paradigms of interaction." The dying neutron star outside provided a perfect metaphor. Just as the star was collapsing, transforming its fundamental structure, so too was the Concordia experiencing a fundamental reorganization. The Krelnax, a species that had always been considered a stable middle-tier member of the Alliance, made the first unexpected move. their diplomatic representative proposed a radical restructuring of the Concordiate's communication and governance protocols. "We are no longer interested in hierarchical control," the Krellnack's representative announced. The statement was both a declaration and a challenge. What humans had initiated through their quantum broadcasts was now taking on a life of its own. Each species was reinterpreting its relationship not just with the Concordiate, but with the fundamental concept of interstellar cooperation. Dr. Emma Chen, monitoring the diplomatic exchanges from the research facility, recognized the deeper pattern. "It's a mimetic transformation," she explained to Rodriguez. "We've introduced a conceptual virus that's rewriting their entire understanding of collective interaction." The station's communication systems began to change. Traditional encrypted channels fractured, replaced by more dynamic, adaptive communication networks. Information flow became less about control and more about collaborative potential. Some Concordiate hardliners attempted to reassert control, but their attempts felt like trying to dam a quantum river with traditional barriers. Each attempt to suppress the emerging communication patterns only accelerated their dissolution. The Xintera made their most surprising move yet. They began sharing advanced cybernetic integration techniques with other marginalized species, technologies they had previously been forbidden from distributing. It was an act of both rebellion and invitation. "We are creating a new form of collective," Kirax communicated. The bioluminescent patterns carried a complexity that went beyond traditional language. It was a communication that was simultaneously a negotiation, a declaration, and an evolving proposal. Ambassador Volkov watched the transformation with a clinical eye. Humanity had not conquered the Concordiate through traditional means. They had provided a conceptual key that allowed suppressed potential to emerge. The diplomatic waystation became something more than a meeting place. It was a birth canal for a new form of interstellar cooperation. As the 30-day countdown continued, the Concordiate was no longer a unified alliance. It had become a dynamic, evolving system, with humanity as its unexpected midwife. Rodriguez's final assessment was characteristically precise. "We didn't defeat them. We gave them the opportunity to defeat themselves." Outside, the neutron star continued its slow, inevitable transformation, a perfect metaphor for the galactic political landscape being rewritten in real time. The final confrontation was not a battle. It was a moment of cosmic revelation. The Concordiate's remaining unified fleet assembled at the nexus point, a gravitationally complex region where multiple star systems converge. Their massive dreadnoughts formed a perfect crystalline formation, each vessel a testament to centuries of technological refinement. They believed this would be humanity's final moment of reckoning. Captain Yasmin Nakamura existed everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Her consciousness was no longer confined to a single vessel. She had become the battle itself, a living, adaptive strategic intelligence that flowed through the quantum communication network like liquid thought. The TSV Horizon was less a ship and more a manifestation of her expanded consciousness. The Concordiate fleet's initial attack was mathematically perfect. Quantum projection models showed overwhelming superiority. Thousands of energy weapons charge, precision targeting systems locked onto predicted human vessel locations. Their computational matrices had analyzed centuries of human conflict, mapped every potential strategic response. They had never been more wrong. Where traditional vessels would have presented defensive formations, the human fleet did something entirely unexpected. They began to deconstruct themselves, not as a retreat, but as a tactical metamorphosis. Individual ships broke down into quantum-entangled clusters. Some transformed into living communication nodes. Others became adaptive energy dispersal systems that could redirect incoming weapon signatures. The entire human fleet became a living, breathing ecosystem of strategic potential. Emma Chen's consciousness was the central node, her mind stretched across multiple dimensional interfaces. She wasn't controlling the battle so much as negotiating with the very fabric of space-time. They're approaching conflict as a mathematical problem, she communicated to Rodriguez. We're approaching it as a living conversation. The Concordiate's weapon systems began to experience inexplicable failures. not through traditional electronic countermeasures, but through something far more sophisticated. Each targeting system encountered quantum uncertainty, potential outcomes that existed simultaneously, rendering precise targeting impossible. Weapon signatures that should have been devastating simply dissolved, or transformed, or found themselves redirected into improbable trajectories. The Zintera and Vornak ships, which had secretly aligned with humanity, added another layer of complexity. They weren't traditional reinforcements. They were adaptive communication nodes that further destabilized the Concordiate's computational models. Admiral Rodriguez watched from the Strategic Command Center, her augmented systems processing the battle's complexity. This wasn't warfare as anyone had ever conceived it. It was a dynamic, living negotiation of potential outcomes. Kaizong's communication systems detected something extraordinary. The battle wasn't just a physical confrontation. It was generating unprecedented amounts of quantum data, each weapon discharge, each strategic maneuver creating informational echoes that would transform scientific understanding. "We're not just fighting," he reported. "We're generating a new form of knowledge." The Concordiate fleet's perfect formation began to fracture, not through traditional damage, but through a fundamental breakdown of their strategic cohesion. Their computational models, which had always assumed rational, predictable responses, encountered something entirely new. Adaptive intelligence. Captain Nakamura's consciousness explored multiple battle potentials simultaneously. She wasn't predicting outcomes, she was negotiating them. Each potential conflict trajectory was examined, understood, and then gently redirected. The TSV Horizon became a living weapon of peace. Its quantum matrices didn't just counter threats, they transformed them. Incoming weapon signatures were systematically reinterpreted. Their fundamental energy signatures shifted into harmless configurations. "We're not destroying them," Emma Chen realized. "We're teaching them." The battle lasted 17 minutes, but those 17 minutes contained more strategic and philosophical complexity than entire centuries of traditional warfare. When the quantum dust settled, the Concordiate fleet wasn't destroyed. It was fundamentally transformed. Vessels that had entered the nexus point as unified weapons of conquest emerged as something else entirely. Their computational cores had been rewritten, their strategic understanding fundamentally altered. Rodriguez's final assessment was characteristically precise. "We didn't defeat an enemy. We expanded a possibility." The 30-day countdown ended not with destruction, but with the birth of something unprecedented, a new understanding of conflict, communication, and collective potential. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had invited it to reimagine itself. The Convergence Chamber was unlike any diplomatic venue in galactic history. Suspended in the quantum-stabilized space between star systems, it existed as a living architecture that responded to the collective consciousness of its occupants. Ambassador Lydia Volkov stood at the center, her presence both physical and quantum projected. Around her, representatives from hundreds of species gathered, not as traditional diplomats, but as collaborative architects of a new galactic paradigm. The Zintera delegation shimmered with bioluminescent communication patterns that danced between physical and digital existence. Kurax, their primary representative, no longer spoke in traditional language. Instead, complex information webs emerged, translating instantaneously across species boundaries. Humanity did not conquer, the collective communication suggested. Humanity invited transformation. Dr. Emma Chen, her consciousness partially integrated with the chamber's quantum communication matrix, understood the deeper implications. This wasn't a peace conference. It was the birth of an entirely new form of collective intelligence. The remnants of the Concordiate sat in carefully curated clusters. They were no longer a unified hierarchy, but a collection of potential collaborators. Their computational cores, fundamentally altered during the final confrontation, now processed information as living ecosystems rather than rigid control structures. Admiral Rodriguez observed from a quantum-entangled monitoring point. Her augmented systems processed the diplomatic interactions with clinical precision. Each communication was a multidimensional negotiation, far beyond traditional diplomatic exchanges. Kaizhong managed the communication infrastructure. What had once been encrypted channels were now dynamic, adaptive information networks that responded to collective intention. Each species contributed not just information, but potential interpretations, creating a living, breathing collective understanding. The chamber itself was a testament to the new paradigm. Its walls were not walls, but adaptive quantum interfaces that visualize communication patterns, scientific discoveries, and potential collaborative trajectories. Mathematical models of potential futures bloomed and collapsed in real time, each visualization a negotiation of collective potential. Dr. Aisha Okoye presented the first collaborative scientific proposal. It wasn't a traditional research plan, but a living framework that invited continuous adaptation. A project to understand dark matter transformation became a collective exploration that transcended individual species' technological limitations. The Vornak scientific delegation contributed quantum mapping techniques that had been suppressed under the old Concordiate structure. The Krelnaks shared advanced adaptive ecosystem management technologies. Each contribution was both a gift and an invitation. Lu Wei, working from the Quantum Research Facility, generated probabilistic models that mapped potential collaborative trajectories. These were not predictions, but living invitations, computational ecosystems that evolved with each interaction. We are creating something beyond governance, Kirax's communication patterns suggested. A collective intelligence that is simultaneously a communication network, a scientific exploration, and a continuous becoming. The chamber's quantum matrices began to generate unprecedented scientific and cultural insights. Technological barriers dissolved. Cultural misunderstandings transformed into collaborative opportunities. Species that had been isolated for millennia discovered shared potential. Rodriguez recognized the profound nature of what was emerging. This wasn't diplomacy. This was the evolution of collective consciousness. The Concordiate believed in control. Emma Chen explained, "We're demonstrating the power of invitation." Breakthrough after breakthrough emerged. A unified approach to sustainable energy generation. Collaborative xenobiological research that could transform medical understanding across hundreds of species. Communication protocols that allowed for nuanced, multidimensional exchange beyond traditional linguistic barriers. The human delegation didn't lead. They facilitated. They invited. They demonstrated a fundamental understanding that true power lies not in conquest, but in creating spaces for collective potential to emerge. As the first collaborative protocols were established, something extraordinary happened. The convergence chamber itself began to evolve. It was becoming more than a meeting space. It was becoming a living representation of collective potential. Kirax's final communication captured the moment's essence. We are not united. We are invited. The old galactic order had not been destroyed. It had been transformed into something unprecedented. A dynamic, collaborative ecosystem of potential. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had simply shown it a mirror and invited it to reimagine itself.